and it's going to ask you. Hello, Loren, and congratulations on your Lifetime Service Award. And thank you for joining us today for this short fireside chat. So to kick off, I'm just curious about what are some of the highlights of your HCI and SIGCHI service that you've taken to date that you think brought you to get this award?
Well, I started out doing the kind of, I guess, service award that many people in the research area do, serving on program committees. And after a while, I started to take on more organizational roles. I guess one of the first really big roles that I did was serving as general co-chair for CHI 2002, which actually took place in Minneapolis, where I now live. I moved just about the time I served as chair for that. And after that, I did a number of leadership roles within the SIGCHI organization. I was elected as vice president for membership and communications. I served as adjunct chair for awards. And then I was elected as president of SIGCHI. And so, I've also been program chair and now general chair for the CSCW conference. So I guess those are the main service roles I've taken on over the last, I guess, 2.5 decades.
I guess what was the highlight of all of them?
That's a hard question to answer, but I am going to go with being president of SIGCHI because it really gave me a global view of everything that was going on in our society. I don't think before I was president of SIGCHI, it was clear to me just how disparate, how diverse, and how dynamic our community is. You know, at the time I was president, we sponsored something like 24 different conferences in all kinds of areas. Also at the time, there were new initiatives going on that I had a part in sort of, I guess, nurturing or creating. So we had moved from pure conference publication to the proceedings of the ACM. So that sort of is changing our publication model. We were really trying to institutionalize that we wanted to move our conferences, including CHI, outside of our traditional areas of North America as well as Europe. And we sort of institutionalized how we wanted to do that with CHI in particular. So I think that was a really good thing. And then I think we took various steps in order to make what people did in service roles more sustainable, and also really opening up roles to the broader community and making sure we were inclusive in who we brought in to serve and help direct and lead the community.
So, of course, in HCI, you're a very well-known researcher. So you're busy as a professor day to day, and also you have lots of work roles that you take on within your current institution. So why dedicate so much time to volunteerism? Like what drove you to do that?
You know, I think there's two types of answers. One is maybe three, I'll say three. The first one is, I guess when I was coming up, I just felt like, you know, playing a role in the community, serving, volunteering, taking on appropriate leadership roles was just something you should do. I mean, as a member in the community, I knew that, you know, conferences and the societies don't run themselves, that somebody has to step up and do it. And it just seemed like the kind of thing you should do. Occasionally there would be things that I felt like I really wanted to accomplish, you know, like this needs to be done. And I would want to step into a role where I could maybe make that happen. And then I guess the third thing is, and this is something that I certainly feel is very real. You have to get individual satisfaction out of the roles you take on, especially when you don't have to take them on. And I think for me, one of the really big things that I looked for was just to make connections and get to know people in the community. When I did my PhD and got started, I was not really in the HCI community. And so as I got into it as a researcher, I really wanted to get to know people and connect with people in the community. And taking on these kind of roles is a good way to do that as well.
So reflecting back, and these days we often hear that early career researchers aren't always encouraged. Sometimes they're actually discouraged from taking on these types of volunteer roles. So what would you say to an early career researcher? What advice would you give them if they're looking to have the same sort of impact in their lives being a volunteer? Would you still encourage people to do it?
Well, absolutely, I would encourage people to do it, but I would encourage people to be mindful of their time and also realize, you have a long career. You don't have to do everything in the first 5 years after you get your PhD if that's the path you're on. And you might well find yourself taking on different roles and shifting your emphasis as you go from early to mid to later in your career. And I would say, I guess I would remind people who are early in their career to be mindful of the opportunities they take, be mindful of their time, but do recognize that if you are a member of our professional community, just as I said, just as I realized, our conferences don't run themselves, our society doesn't run themselves. If there's challenges that we face, that our community faces, or opportunities, that you should think about how you can step up to be a part of being a solution to those challenges.
So how do you think all of this service has impacted your career positively or negatively?
That's a great question. I don't think it's impacted my career negatively in any way. And I'm trying to think positively. I guess I would say I'll come back to one of the reasons why I really, I guess, was motivated to do this. It gave me the opportunity to meet people, like you, Aaron, and many people who now are in leadership in HCI. And I feel like it's really valuable to form those connections, both to know what's going on in the community, to broaden my own perspective, and to be able to, I guess, call on people, not so much for personal favors to advance my career, but, when I need to learn something, or when I feel like there's something the community as a whole could really benefit from, or our institutions, there's many people I can talk to. And so I guess I consider that a benefit to my career, even if it's not particularly, leading to me directly getting more research done, for example. It still benefits me.
I think one thing you realize when you're taking on these service roles is that there's lots of people who help you along the way. And I was curious as, who are some of the people who helped and supported you through your career with the service that they gave, and how did they help you?
I think there's so many people, it's kind of hard to say. Let me say that at every institution I've been, people who, well, when I was at AT&T Labs, and I took on some leadership roles, first in the, in sort of, I guess, program committees and some conference organizing before I was chair of the CHI conference. My managers, like Julia Hirschberg, were always very supportive, just no problem in letting me take on those responsibilities. Same way, once I came to the University of Minnesota, whatever I did, the leadership in my department, first Vipin Kumar and then Mats Heimdall, were completely supportive. And so, especially when I was president of SIGCHI, Mats Heimdall was department head, and he made it easy for me to take on that role. And then I guess Joe Constan, who is in my department, I'd say in some ways I've followed in his footsteps and learned from him, because I think almost every leadership role I've taken on, Joe himself has taken on before. And so he was both a role model and a sounding board and you know, in some ways just a guide to help me do those things. And then so many people like I've served with on in various capacities. I was on the SIGCHI executive committee in some capacity from, I guess, about 2009 to 2021. And, you know, Gerard van der Veer was the president when I first was on. I think Elizabeth Churchill was executive vice president. And, you know, I had the opportunity to serve with them. And then when I was president, I guess, you know, I got to bring people in to some extent, or I had influence on who else got to serve on the executive committee. And I really feel like I learned from all of them and was, you know, supported by all of them. And so I think of people like Helena Mentis, who was the executive vice president with me, and you, Aaron, who was vice president for conferences, and Cliff Lampy on publications. You know, just people who were so active and such great leaders. And, you know, whatever I was doing, I was never doing it alone. And all the people I mentioned, and I'm sure many others who I'm not thinking about right offhand, just played, you know, significant roles in helping me at all stages of wherever I was in the roles I was taking on.
I feel like my questions are getting increasingly hard to answer because the next one I'm
going to say pass at one of
going to
these
say
things.
pass. No, but
Yeah.
I've actually thought about the next question myself, and I wonder how I would answer it. That just thinking about the service that we do, like what are the important lessons that you've learned from your years of service to the global HCI community? Like, can you distill it down to 3 kind of key lessons that you've learned? Or maybe 5 if you're being brave?
Well, let me ask you a question. Lessons for whom?
I guess lessons for the wider community about what they ask of their leaders when they take on these leadership roles.
Okay, I have a few, and they won't all be for the broader community. But one lesson I think for the broader community, let's call it the HCI community, is I guess be realistic and be charitable toward the people who are in positions of leadership. I'm gonna, you know, say that from my perspective, I see people in the broader community questioning the motives and assumptions behind some of the decisions people who temporarily are in leadership positions in the community are making. And I think I can say from the inside, everybody that I've seen in whatever role I've been, I mean, I had some visibility into the people who were making decisions for the society, for SIGCHI, and for conferences, even before I had any particular leadership role. And even if I disagreed, I felt like they had good motives and they were trying, they were sincere. And after I sort of passed through being president of SIGCHI and was past president, and even after that ended, I still had some visibility back. And I may not have agreed with everything that people did, but I really feel like people are sincere and they're trying. And I also feel like people are open and are in almost all cases wanting to hear from the community, wanting to understand what the needs and unmet challenges are and how things can be better. Yeah, so I think that's an important lesson for everyone in the community. That's one lesson. I guess for people who are thinking about serving, maybe picking up on something I mentioned before, I really would say that I think you need to think about why you are taking on service and what kind of service makes sense for you. I know one thing that I learned quite a while ago from actually one of my colleagues at the University of Minnesota, Mark Snyder, who's a social psychologist who studies how people or why people volunteer in organizations. You know, one of the really robust findings from his research is that people might start to volunteer for, let's say, altruistic or other oriented reasons. But for people to stick with it, they have to be getting something personally for themselves as well. Now, that's no surprise. It's not a selfishness or egotism to say that. But I do think people need to realize, well, what is it that I am getting out of this that makes me want to keep doing this? And you have to have that, I think. And so for new and potential volunteers, I would urge you to think about that. And as I said a couple of times, for me, one of the things that was really a motivation personally was to get to know people and form connections and so on. I guess another lesson might be over the course of your career, things are going to change. And for quite a while now, I've thought that it's important for people to sort of move through the different roles, that it's not good for people to stay in a particular leadership role of any kind indefinitely, that it's good to take your turn, to contribute what you can, and then move on, often to give other people a turn, and sometimes to give, a new and fresher generation a turn. So that's another lesson that I think people need to keep in mind.
And do you think from your own experience, is there anything you would do differently, or do you think there's general advice you give to people? I mean, one bit of advice you've already given is that people sometimes try to rush and do it all in the shortest period possible. But are there other reflections you have?
Well, I think you shifted your question. I think I've given my advice. All I can think of are the lessons. Would I do anything differently, though? That's another question. Well, I'll say I think I was mostly reactive and opportunistic in the roles that I took on. Like, I was asked to do things and I was like, yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. Sounds like somebody needs to do it. And I think it would have been better if I'd have been more strategic and intentional. Seems like that's always the case, right? If I would have said, here are the roles that I think I should take on, and I'm going to focus on them rather than mostly taking advantage of opportunities as they arose.
Okay, and as we
Oh,
wrap up,
I should name one other person, because I think it was Allison Druin who got me on some primitive video conferencing, probably Skype, and said, hey, would you be willing to run for president of SIGCHI? So I should probably give her a shout out as well.
so is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to kind of highlight as you look back on your career and you think about all the service that you've done, and as you think about this award and what it actually means for you personally? I guess that's one question I didn't ask you. Like, what does this award mean for you personally?
Well, it's really an honor. It's just an honor. I mean, I have spent, I guess my first volunteer role in a SIGCHI capacity was probably about, I guess my first program committee might have been like CHI 1996 or something. So I've devoted a lot of time to this, and I think and I hope that I've done some things that I think make the community at least a little bit better, and maybe make our volunteer efforts work a little bit better. And so it's gratifying to receive this award, and it truly is an honor to receive it.
I think you said it very well, to leave your mark, to make things a little bit better, to have done some good, and to actually have set things up well for the next generation of volunteers. So thank you again for joining us today, and thank you for your reflections on this award. And thank you again, of course, for your service to the SIGCHI and HCI community globally.
Thank you, Aaron. And I guess I speak for both of us when I'll say, I think you said it before, I wish we could be there in Germany, and wish we could see you all, and I hope you're enjoying yourselves.
Take care.
Bye-bye.